I want to say this, that the dollar will eventually lose its status of the world's reserve currency. That is written in stone. What is not written in stone is whether it will happen tomorrow or in 5 years' time. But it is likely to happen step by step, like an avalanche, slowly developing and then exploding. But in my view, the dollar is of course doomed as a currency. But the others are also doomed. That is the beauty. The dollar exists and is a strong currency as long as the others are equally bad or worse, which is the case. I live in Thailand. The Thai price level is much, much lower than the price level in the United States. You don't need to be an economist to observe that. Now, if you came to me and asked, Mark, you live in a country where the price level is much lower than in the US. Why wouldn't you put all your money in Thailand and not in the US? I'd be very reluctant to hold all my assets in Thailand. Equally, I would be very reluctant to hold all my assets in the US. So I diversify. People, they ask me, what do you think? Should I live in Thailand? I have no idea. I can say to them, for me, the country is suitable, but whether it's suitable for you, I don't know. And an individual who asked the question is actually, in my view, to some extent dumb. Because this is a question that is very personal. He should go himself and see for himself and travel through Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Bhutan, God knows what, and then decide himself. And the decision may be wrong because he may have the wrong impression the first day. But you can adapt. You can say, okay, I made a mistake. I have to adapt to the new conditions of life. But if I lived in Europe and I had my family in Europe and this and that, I would consider living in a small place in a rural area, not next to a bridge, because bridges in war times are the first ones to get destroyed, but near a river that is not flooding. This is another issue. You would have to live a little bit higher than the river level, because I live next to the river, and in 20 years we've been flooded already twice. But it's not the end of the world. It's repairable. It's not like an earthquake which destroyed everything or fire in a city. In many so-called, like Thailand, they say it's a failed state and so forth. But I wrote about it. Is it because it's a failed state that so many expatriates come and live in Thailand? From all over the world, they come here and they like to be in Thailand, for whatever reason. So it's maybe not such a failed state. Maybe the definition that are used in the Western world for failed state is wrong. Maybe for the Western world, its GDP growth is very important. In my view, its importance is overstated in the Western world. What matters is the standard of living. And in Thailand, the standard of living of expatriates is relatively high because the cost of living is much lower than in the Western world. There are resets that are advantageous and there are resets that are not so advantageous. Let me give you two examples. Life in Russia before the Russian Revolution of 1918 wasn't particularly nice for lower class people. But there was some prosperity and the farmers had their farms and some became actually quite wealthy, not enormously wealthy, but some people had large farms and so forth. And then the Bolsheviks came and destroyed everything with the socialist ideology. And not only did they destroyed everything, under the Bolsheviks, the agricultural production of Russia shrunk by something like 70%. So to all the young people in America and everywhere in the world who want more, the government to do more and want socialism and so forth, to them I can say one thing. If you're prepared to accept a meaningfully lower standard of living for yourself and your families, then socialism may be appropriate for you. But I've been already in the 50s and 60s in many socialist countries. I can tell you it is distressing and it is depressing and it is a disaster for society. People have no freedom, no nothing. And the capitalistic system is not a system that has only advantages and no disadvantages. I'm aware capitalism is better at accumulating wealth and creating wealth than at distributing it. But it is certainly better at distributing wealth than socialist governments. That I assure you. Of any government, and especially as incompetent as we have nowadays in the US, in Canada, Australia, and Western Europe. The second instance of a major reset was China became communist in 1949, and everything was nationalized, and people who had real estate, it didn't matter whether it was in the south or in rural areas or in urban centers. It was all taken away, like in Russia. Socialists are very good at stealing, because the basic philosophy of a socialist is envy. Envy of people who are successful in life because they work. They're not geniuses, but they became wealthy through hard work. Like you go anywhere in the world, the Jews tend to be an upper income group of people because they worked harder wherever they went in the world. So anyway, 49, China becomes communist. Shanghai, who used to be called the Paris of the East and a very important financial center, vanished. I went for the first time to China in like 78, 76, couldn't get a taxi, nothing worked, no lights, and people had blue and green dresses and so forth and so on. Then Deng Xiaoping opens up the country. It was an experiment. It was with the 7 economic zones in the south, mostly located around Hong Kong. It was successful. And by the late 1980s, the whole country became a special economic zone. And since then, we had rapid economic growth. And I can say to all the China bashers, it's hard to imagine a society that comes from extreme poverty, like they were living in 70s, to a relatively high standard of living. You understand? The infrastructure in China is that of the most modern societies in the world. Much better than what you find in New York City and Chicago and so forth. And that is a reset from a communist country to a market economy. It's not a 100% market economy, but to a large extent, it's a free economy. I urge you to watch some videos of Milton Friedman, who already in the 80s and 90s made observations about, countries moving to the left. And in one brief video, he said, we, the West, won the Cold War. Our principles of freedom and free economy and the capitalistic system proved to be superior to the command economy of the Soviet Union. And with this victory and the fall of the Berlin Wall, what did we do? We adopted more and more socialist policies. It's remarkable. My concern is that we are in a situation where too many people benefit from the government. They get subsidized from the government. Social benefits. If you build a factory, we'll give you $100 billion. The factory may not make sense economically, but the government, because they give them $100 billion, the company will build the factory. So with all these measures, we are retarded economic growth and we have less freedom. And that is a concern. And in Thailand, we have less of these government interventions, much less. Also in Asia, less. I would be very careful with the US and saying government spending is 15% of GDP, because we have to add state governments, we have to add spending by municipalities and so forth. And I've seen statistics now where the federal government spends actually more than 27% of GDP. And all together, with all the subsidies, and it's an accounting issue. Does the government build, say, shoes, or does it subsidize a company that manufactures shoes? And so the statistics are not very reliable. But in general, I can say this. Throughout the 19th century in America, federal government spending was 3% of GDP maximum. By 1910, it had grown to about 8%. In European countries, between 7% and 12%. Now, everywhere, it's about close to 50%. That is a disaster for economic growth, I tell you. Now, someone will turn around and say to me, Mark, you're looking at economic growth as if that was important. I look at the quality of life. The government spent all this money on cleaner energy and things like this. There is some truth to it. I can see that in some countries, the quality of life has improved. But I can also see that in some countries, including Chicago, the quality of life has gone down meaningfully. San Francisco, meaningfully.